Inside every human being lives a warrior, not one born on a battlefield, but one born in struggle, pressure, pain, and responsibility. Today is not about motivation. Today is about awakening. Today we wake up the warrior within you. You were not born weak. You were not born afraid. You were not born to quit. As a child, you fell and stood back up again and again and again. Life didn't break you. Life trained you. But somewhere along the way, society taught you to play small. Fear taught you to stay quiet. Comfort taught you to stay asleep. The warrior didn't die. He just went silent. Today we wake him up. 1. Everyone has an inner warrior, whether they recognize it or not, because the human being was never designed merely to survive, but to endure, to rise, and to overcome. And this truth has echoed through centuries of philosophy, history, and lived human experience. From the earliest thinkers to modern psychologists, the same message returns again and again, that within every person exists a force stronger than fear, louder than doubt, and more persistent than pain. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus declared, "Character is destiny," reminding us that our fate is not written by circumstance, but forged by the inner strength we cultivate. And that strength is nothing other than the warrior spirit within. Plato, in his theory of the soul, spoke of the thymos, the spirited part of the human psyche, which gives rise to courage, righteous anger, and the will to stand firm. And without this inner warrior, reason becomes weak and desire becomes chaotic. History itself is a record of human beings pushed to the edge, discovering in their darkest moments a strength they never knew they possessed. A phenomenon perfectly captured by the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who said circumstances do not make the man, they only reveal him. Because adversity does not create the warrior, it awakens him. Every human life contains moments of breaking, moments when quitting feels logical and surrender feels justified. Yet it is precisely at those moments that the inner warrior whispers, "Stand up one more time." Marcus Aurelius, both emperor and philosopher, wrote in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And this realization is the foundation of the warrior mindset. For the greatest battles are not fought on fields of blood and steel, but in the silent chambers of the human mind. Friedrich Nietzsche went further, asserting, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how," revealing that the inner warrior is fueled not by comfort, but by meaning, by a purpose strong enough to justify struggle. Modern psychology echoes this ancient wisdom, as Carl Jung taught that the power we deny within ourselves does not disappear, but turns against us, saying, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious," because the inner warrior is born not from pretending to be strong, but from confronting weakness honestly. Every fear you face, every failure you survive, every rejection you endure is not evidence of inadequacy, but proof that the warrior within you is being trained. Aristotle reminded us that excellence is not a single act, but a habit. And the warrior is not someone who wins once, but someone who chooses discipline over comfort again and again. Humanity's greatest tragedy is not suffering itself, but forgetting that suffering can refine strength. And this is why Ralph Waldo Emerson proclaimed, "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us," pointing directly to the inner warrior as the true source of human greatness. Every setback in life carries a hidden invitation to either collapse into bitterness or rise into resilience, and only those who answer that invitation awaken their warrior spirit. Confucius summarized this eternal truth with simplicity when he said, "Our greatest glory is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall," because the warrior is not defined by invincibility but by persistence. When life strips away comfort, applause, and certainty, what remains is not weakness but raw human will. And Viktor Frankl, a survivor of the Nazi concentration camps, testified to this when he wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves," revealing that even in absolute suffering, the inner warrior retains the freedom to choose courage. Modern society often numbs this warrior through convenience and distraction. Yet the warrior does not die. He sleeps, waiting for a reason to awaken. Jordan Peterson speaks to this dormant strength when he advises, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today, because the warrior's path is not competition with others but conquest of the self. The inner warrior does not announce himself loudly. He is forged quietly through daily discipline, responsibility, and self-respect. Ancient Eastern philosophy aligns with this view. As Lao Tzu taught, he who conquers others is strong. He who conquers himself is mighty, establishing self-mastery as the highest form of power. Every human being is engaged in a battle against fear, against laziness, against despair, against meaninglessness, and the presence of struggle is not evidence of failure but proof that the battle matters. The warrior within does not promise comfort. He promises growth, and growth always demands sacrifice. Seneca, another Stoic philosopher, stated, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body, reminding us that resistance is not punishment but preparation. No great individual in history was born from ease. They were shaped by pressure, refined by hardship, and disciplined by responsibility. The inner warrior does not seek perfection, he seeks progress. Every time you choose action over excuse, discipline over impulse, and courage over fear, you feed this warrior. The moment you say, I cannot, the warrior is silenced. But the moment you say, I will try, the battle begins. This battle is internal, invisible, and deeply personal. Yet it determines the quality of your entire life. The world may never see your struggle, but your character is being shaped in those unseen moments. And in the end, the truth remains unshaken. Everyone has an inner warrior, but only a few choose to awaken him. And those who do may never rule nations or command armies, yet they achieve something far greater: mastery over themselves, dignity in suffering, and victory in the only battle that truly matters, the battle within. Too comfort is the enemy of growth, because nothing meaningful in human history has ever been created from ease, convenience, or uninterrupted safety. And every serious philosopher, thinker, and observer of the human condition has warned us, explicitly or implicitly, that comfort sedates the soul while struggle sharpens it. The moment human beings prioritize comfort over challenge, they trade long-term strength for short-term pleasure, and this trade has consequences not just for individuals, but for civilizations. The ancient Stoic philosopher Seneca warned, a man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary. Yet he also insisted that voluntary hardship builds resilience, because controlled discomfort prepares the mind for unavoidable pain. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire under constant threat, reminded himself daily that comfort weakens resolve, writing in Meditations, "What stands in the way becomes the way," meaning that resistance itself is the path to growth, not something to be avoided. Comfort lulls the mind into believing that stability is permanent. But history teaches that nothing stable survives without adaptation, and adaptation is born only in discomfort. Friedrich Nietzsche captured this brutal truth when he declared, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," a statement not glorifying suffering for its own sake, but emphasizing that growth emerges only when comfort is shattered, and the individual is forced to rebuild from within. Modern society aggressively sells comfort as the highest. Good instant gratification, effortless entertainment, frictionless living. Yet this very comfort erodes discipline, dulls ambition, and produces fragile minds unable to withstand pressure. Plato, centuries ago, warned that a life governed by pleasure becomes enslaved to desire, arguing that discipline and struggle are necessary to align the soul toward truth and excellence. Comfort tells you to rest before you are tired, to quit before you are broken, to settle before you are fulfilled. And this is precisely why it is the enemy of growth. Aristotle taught that virtue is formed through habit, but habits are not built in comfort. They are forged through repetition under resistance, through choosing what is difficult over what is easy. Comfort delays action by whispering, "Tomorrow is enough," while growth demands the courage to act today. Epictetus, once a slave and later a philosopher, understood this deeply, stating, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid, because growth requires enduring discomfort, judgment, and temporary humiliation. Comfort seeks approval. Growth accepts isolation. Comfort avoids pain. Growth transforms it." Throughout history, those who achieved greatness did so by rejecting the safety of the familiar and stepping into uncertainty. Socrates willingly drank the hemlock rather than betray truth, demonstrating that comfort preserved at the cost of integrity is a form of spiritual death. Comfort breeds stagnation, and stagnation breeds decay, a principle visible not only in human psychology but in nature itself. Anything that does not grow dies. Ralph Waldo Emerson observed, "People wish to be settled. Only as far as they are unsettled is there any hope for them," emphasizing that inner unrest is the engine of transformation. Comfort numbs this unrest, turning potential into passivity. Modern psychology confirms what ancient philosophy already knew, that resilience is developed through stress, not avoidance, through challenge, not ease. Carl Jung warned that a life lived without tension becomes psychologically impoverished, insisting that meaning is born from confronting difficulty rather than escaping it. Comfort shields individuals from failure, but failure is the greatest teacher, the forge where humility, skill, and wisdom are shaped. Confucius taught that moral strength is cultivated through self-discipline and perseverance, not indulgence, reminding us that the superior person is one who remains firm in adversity. Comfort creates the illusion of security, but true security comes from competence, and competence is earned only through struggle. Viktor Frankl, surviving unimaginable suffering, demonstrated that meaning, not comfort, is humanity's deepest need. Writing, "Those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how." Comfort removes the why by making life too easy to question and too shallow to challenge. When everything is comfortable, nothing feels urgent. And when nothing feels urgent, growth dies quietly. Jordan Peterson speaks to this modern crisis when he warns against the pursuit of a painless life, arguing that responsibility, not happiness, gives life meaning. Comfort promises happiness but delivers emptiness, because happiness without purpose collapses under the first sign of hardship. Discomfort, on the other hand, builds capacity, the capacity to endure, to adapt, to lead, and to overcome. Lao Tzu observed, "If you do not change direction, you may end up where you are heading," and comfort resists direction change, clinging to familiar ground even as it erodes beneath one's feet. Every major turning point in a human life is preceded by discomfort, a moment when the old identity no longer fits and the new one has not yet formed. Comfort encourages retreat from this painful threshold, while growth demands crossing it. Seneca again reminds us that luxury weakens the mind, because the more a person relies on external ease, the less capable they become internally. Comfort creates dependency, while hardship creates self-reliance. Civilizations collapse not from external invasion alone, but from internal softness, a pattern recognized by historians and philosophers alike. Ibn Khaldun, centuries before modern sociology, warned that societies decay when luxury replaces discipline and struggle, proving that this principle transcends culture and time. Personal growth follows the same law. When life becomes too comfortable, character erodes. Comfort rewards the minimum effort required to survive, while growth demands the maximum effort required to evolve. Every meaningful skill, physical strength, intellectual mastery, emotional resilience is born through repeated discomfort. The gym grows muscle by tearing it. The mind grows wisdom by confronting uncertainty. And the soul grows depth by enduring pain. Nietzsche criticized modern humanity for seeking comfort over greatness, arguing that comfort produces the last man, safe, entertained, and spiritually empty. Comfort hates risk, but growth requires it. Comfort seeks guarantees, but growth begins where certainty ends. Søren Kierkegaard described anxiety as the dizziness of freedom, implying that discomfort is the price of becoming fully human. Avoiding discomfort means avoiding freedom itself. Comfort offers escape, but growth demands engagement. Comfort encourages consumption. Growth requires creation. Comfort lives in the present moment only. Growth invests in the future. Every time a person chooses comfort over challenge, they reinforce weakness, and every time they choose challenge over comfort, they strengthen their inner warrior. The enemy is not rest or recovery, but permanent comfort, the refusal to struggle at all. Growth does not ask you to suffer meaninglessly. It asks you to suffer purposefully. And this is the final truth echoed by philosophers across time and culture. A life devoted to comfort will always feel safe, but it will never feel complete. A life devoted to growth will often feel uncomfortable, but it will always feel alive. And that is why comfort is the enemy of growth, because growth demands friction, resistance, and sacrifice, and only those willing to endure discomfort awaken the warrior within and rise beyond the limits of who they once were. 3. Pain is a powerful teacher, not because suffering is desirable, but because pain strips away illusion, exposes truth, and forces growth in ways comfort and ease never can. And this understanding has been echoed across centuries by philosophers, warriors, mystics, and survivors who recognize that pain is not merely an enemy to be avoided, but a profound instructor that shapes character, sharpens wisdom, and awakens the deepest strength within the human soul. From the very beginning of philosophical inquiry, pain has been recognized as an unavoidable companion of becoming. For Heraclitus taught that conflict is the father of all things, meaning that transformation arises, not from harmony alone, but from tension and struggle. And pain is the language through which that tension speaks. Socrates, who devoted his life to questioning false certainty, demonstrated through his death that pain endured for truth is nobler than comfort preserved through dishonesty, revealing that suffering can clarify values and purify intention. Pain forces us to confront reality without distraction, and Plato understood this when he described the painful ascent out of the cave, where the prisoner's eyes burn in the light of truth, symbolizing that knowledge itself is painful at first, but liberating in the end. Throughout history, those who avoided pain remained unchanged, while those who faced it emerged transformed. And this is why the Stoic philosophers treated pain not as catastrophe but as curriculum. Epictetus, born into slavery and crippled by abuse, declared, "Difficulty shows what men are," emphasizing that pain does not weaken the soul, it reveals its strength. Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself amid war, plague, and betrayal, reminded that pain is neither good nor bad by itself, but an opportunity to practice virtue, stating, if it is endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining, not out of cruelty, but out of respect for human resilience. Pain demands attention, and attention is the gateway to learning. Seneca observed that prosperity teaches little, while adversity educates deeply, noting that fire tests gold, suffering tests brave men, because pain exposes what comfort hides: our fears, our attachments, our illusions, and our untapped strength. Modern psychology merely confirms what ancient wisdom already knew. Growth follows stress, not safety, and resilience is born through hardship, not avoidance. Pain humbles the ego by reminding us of our limits, yet simultaneously expands our capacity by forcing adaptation. Friedrich Nietzsche articulated this paradox when he wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star," acknowledging that inner turmoil and suffering are often prerequisites for greatness. Pain is the forge in which meaning is hammered into existence. And Viktor Frankl, surviving the horrors of Nazi concentration camps, testified that pain becomes bearable the moment it is given purpose, famously stating, "In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning." Pain teaches patience by slowing us down, empathy by connecting us to others' suffering, and humility by reminding us we are not invincible. Carl Jung believed that neurosis often emerges from unacknowledged pain, asserting that the greatest and most important problems of life are fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. And pain is the mechanism through which this outgrowing occurs. Without pain, growth would remain superficial, cosmetic, and fragile. Pain breaks old identities so that stronger ones can form. Every loss, betrayal, failure, and heartbreak carries a lesson that no book can teach. Because pain teaches not through explanation, but through experience. Aristotle argued that virtue is developed through struggle and habit, not theory alone. And pain is often the feedback system that corrects our course when reason alone fails. Pain interrupts arrogance and forces reflection. It removes false friends, false dreams, and false versions of ourselves. Confucius taught that wisdom is cultivated through perseverance in adversity, noting that the superior person remains steadfast when circumstances are harsh, because pain trains moral endurance. Pain is the price of transformation, and transformation is never comfortable. Søren Kierkegaard viewed suffering and anxiety as integral to becoming an authentic individual, suggesting that pain awakens self-awareness and responsibility, forcing us to confront freedom and choice. Pain introduces depth into human existence, separating those who merely exist from those who truly live. Modern society attempts to anesthetize pain through distraction, consumption, and denial. But numbing pain also numbs growth, wisdom, and resilience. Pain ignored becomes pain repeated, while pain confronted becomes pain transformed. Rumi, the great Sufi philosopher-poet, captured this timeless truth when he wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you," recognizing that pain can open doors to spiritual awakening rather than close them. Pain teaches discipline by demanding structure when chaos threatens to overwhelm. It teaches courage by requiring action despite fear. It teaches gratitude by revealing what truly matters. Lao Tzu observed that softness and yielding overcome hardness and resistance, suggesting that pain teaches flexibility rather than rigidity, adaptation rather than stubbornness. Every major evolution in a person's life is preceded by suffering. No rebirth occurs without contraction. Pain sharpens perception, stripping away trivial concerns and focusing attention on essentials. Jordan Peterson warns that avoiding pain leads to greater suffering later because postponed pain compounds into bitterness and resentment. Pain faced early becomes wisdom later. Pain trains the nervous system to endure uncertainty, preparing individuals for leadership, responsibility, and sacrifice. Societies that attempt to eliminate all pain produce fragile individuals, incapable of facing reality. Ibn Khaldun recognized that hardship builds strength in individuals and civilizations, while excessive ease leads to decay. Pain is not the opposite of happiness, but often the doorway to it, because lasting fulfillment is earned through endurance, not granted through pleasure. Pain tests commitment. Only goals worth suffering for survive its scrutiny. Pain exposes character when masks fall away. Pain teaches boundaries by showing us what we can and cannot tolerate. Pain develops compassion by reminding us that every human being carries invisible battles. Pain teaches silence when words fail and humility when pride collapses. Nietzsche criticized cultures that flee pain, arguing that suffering is essential to the development of higher values. Pain demands responsibility, asking not, "Why me?" but "What will I become because of this?" The inner warrior is not awakened by comfort or praise, but by wounds endured and lessons learned. Pain creates warriors not because it is cruel, but because it is honest. It does not lie, flatter, or negotiate. It simply presents reality and demands response. Every scar carries knowledge. Every hardship carries instruction. Every tear carries truth. Pain is not a punishment, it is feedback. It signals misalignment, immaturity, or growth in progress. Pain refines attention, forcing presence in a distracted world. Buddhist philosophy teaches that suffering is inherent in existence, not to promote despair, but to cultivate wisdom and detachment. Pain reveals impermanence, breaking attachment to illusions of control. Pain teaches surrender, where control fails, and effort, where surrender is not enough. Pain deepens gratitude by contrasting what was with what remains. Pain awakens the warrior within by demanding strength where none seem to exist. Those who listen to pain learn faster, grow deeper, and stand stronger. Those who numb pain delay growth and multiply suffering. In the end, every meaningful human story contains pain not as a footnote, but as a turning point. Pain is the crucible in which identity is tested and purpose clarified. And this is the enduring truth echoed across philosophy, psychology, history, and lived human experience. Pain is a powerful teacher because it educates the whole being, mind, body, and soul. And those who accept its lessons do not merely survive life's trials, they emerge wiser, stronger, and awakened, carrying within them the quiet, unbreakable strength of the warrior who has learned not only how to endure pain, but how to be transformed by it. 4. Master your mind first. Because before you can conquer circumstances, opponents, systems, or even fate itself, you must first conquer the chaotic battlefield within your own head. And this truth has been recognized across civilizations, philosophies, and centuries as the foundational law of human strength. Every external victory is first won internally, and every defeat begins as a failure of thought, discipline, or perception. The ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who was born a slave yet lived freer than kings, stated with piercing clarity, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters," revealing that mastery of the mind is the ultimate form of freedom, because the person who controls their reactions controls their destiny. Marcus Aurelius, ruling the Roman Empire while enduring war, betrayal, and plague, wrote in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength," emphasizing that strength does not come from eliminating hardship, but from governing one's inner response to it. The mind is the first battlefield, where fear negotiates surrender, doubt whispers retreat, and distraction weakens resolve. And unless this battlefield is disciplined, no amount of external power can secure lasting victory. Plato taught that a disordered soul produces a disordered life, arguing that reason must rule over impulse and appetite. Because without mental mastery, human beings become slaves to desire rather than masters of themselves. History shows again and again that the most dangerous enemy is not external opposition, but internal chaos, undisciplined thought, unchecked emotion, and unexamined belief. Aristotle reinforced this by teaching that virtue is a form of rational self-control, not emotional suppression, but intelligent regulation, where the mind directs action toward excellence rather than impulse. Mastering the mind does not mean silencing emotion, but understanding it, channeling it, and refusing to be ruled by it. Buddhist philosophy begins with the recognition that the mind creates suffering when left untrained, teaching that awareness and discipline liberate the individual from unconscious reaction. Lao Tzu captured this wisdom simply when he said, "He who conquers others is strong. He who conquers himself is mighty," placing self-mastery above conquest, wealth, or dominance. The untrained mind exaggerates fear, magnifies obstacles, and invents limitations that do not exist, while the trained mind clarifies reality, focuses energy, and sustains effort under pressure. Friedrich Nietzsche understood the danger of mental weakness, warning that he who cannot obey himself will be commanded, meaning that those who fail to discipline their inner world become vulnerable to manipulation, fear, and resentment. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient philosophers already knew, that repeated thoughts become patterns, patterns become habits, and habits become identity, making mental discipline not an abstract ideal, but a biological necessity. William James, the father of modern psychology, stated, "The greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitudes, affirming that mastery of mind precedes mastery of circumstance. The warrior who fails to master his mind is defeated before the battle begins. Because panic overrides strategy, ego clouds judgment, and impulse sabotages patience." Sun Tzu, though a military strategist, spoke directly to mental mastery when he wrote, "If you know yourself and know your enemy, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. And knowing yourself begins with understanding your own thoughts, fears, and motivations. The mind left unchecked becomes reactive, while the mind trained becomes intentional. Carl Jung warned that what we fail to make conscious controls us unconsciously, meaning that the unexamined mind is not free. It is governed by shadow, impulse, and unresolved fear. Mastering the mind requires brutal honesty, because self-deception is the most comfortable and destructive illusion of all. Socrates built his entire philosophy on the principle that self-knowledge is the foundation of wisdom, demonstrating that without understanding one's own mind, no external knowledge can bring clarity. Emotional reactivity weakens leadership, clouds judgment, and shortens endurance, while emotional regulation builds authority, composure, and resilience. Viktor Frankl, who survived unimaginable suffering, proved that mental mastery can survive even when physical freedom is stripped away. Writing, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And that space is the domain of the disciplined mind. The modern world wages constant war against attention, focus, and reflection, because a distracted mind is easy to control, easy to exhaust, and easy to defeat. Mastering the mind today is an act of rebellion against noise, addiction, and passivity. Jordan Peterson emphasizes this when he argues that responsibility begins with ordering one's inner world, because chaos within inevitably spills outward into chaos in life. The untrained mind seeks comfort, validation, and escape, while the trained mind seeks meaning, responsibility, and growth. Stoic philosophy teaches premeditation of adversity, not to cultivate pessimism, but to strengthen mental preparedness, ensuring that surprise does not break resolve. Seneca warned that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality, exposing how an undisciplined mind manufactures pain long before it arrives. Fear is rarely a response to reality. It is a response to mental simulation. Mastering the mind collapses imagined catastrophes into manageable challenges. Discipline of thought precedes discipline of action, because action follows belief, and belief follows perception. Confucius taught that self-regulation is the root of moral strength, emphasizing that the superior person governs themselves before attempting to govern others. Leadership without self-mastery degenerates into tyranny or incompetence. Mastering the mind is not about eliminating negative thoughts, but about refusing to let them dominate decision-making. Ralph Waldo Emerson observed, "A man is what he thinks about all day long," highlighting that thought is not passive, it is formative. The warrior mindset requires mental endurance, the ability to hold focus when bored, remain calm when provoked, and persist when results are delayed. Nietzsche criticized modern humanity for seeking comfort over self-discipline, arguing that greatness demands internal order strong enough to withstand chaos. Mastering the mind requires structure, routines, reflection, silence, and intentional struggle. Because without structure, the mind drifts toward entropy. Stoicism, Buddhism, Aristotelian ethics, and modern psychology converge on one point. The mind must be trained like a muscle, through repeated resistance, attention, and control. The inner warrior is forged not in moments of external triumph, but in moments of internal restraint, when anger is controlled, when fear is examined, when impulse is delayed. Søren Kierkegaard warned that avoiding inner struggle leads to despair, because without confronting oneself, a person never becomes authentic. Mastery of the mind is the foundation of courage, because courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to be governed by it. Every meaningful transformation begins with mental reorganization, changing what you tolerate, what you prioritize, and what you believe is possible. James Allen, author of As a Man Thinketh, declared, "A man is literally what he thinks, his character being the complete sum of all his thoughts," reinforcing that mastery of thought equals mastery of character. The unmastered mind seeks excuses, while the mastered mind seeks responsibility. The unmastered mind reacts, the mastered mind responds. The unmastered mind collapses under pressure. The mastered mind sharpens. Mastery of the mind is not achieved through motivation, but through discipline, not through inspiration, but through repetition. The inner warrior is silent, patient, and focused, because noise belongs to weakness and clarity belongs to strength. In the end, all philosophies converge on this unshakable principle. Before you can change your life, you must change how you think. Before you can command respect, you must command yourself. Before you can fight the world, you must first win the war within. And that is why master your mind first is not advice, it is law, because the mind is the root of all action, all endurance, and all greatness. And those who discipline it awaken the warrior within, capable not only of surviving chaos, but of shaping order, meaning, and purpose from it. Think discipline beats motivation. Discipline beats motivation. Because motivation is an emotion and discipline is a system. And history has never been shaped by fleeting emotions, but by structured, repeated, and often uncomfortable actions carried out long after inspiration has faded. Motivation arrives like a spark, unpredictable, short-lived, and dependent on mood, while discipline is a forge, shaping character daily regardless of how one feels. And this distinction has been understood by philosophers, warriors, monks, and builders of civilizations across time. Aristotle observed that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit, revealing that greatness is not born from moments of enthusiasm, but from disciplined repetition. Motivation asks, do I feel like it today? While discipline asks, what must be done regardless? And only the second question builds anything lasting. Plato warned that a life ruled by desire becomes chaotic, arguing that reason and structure must govern impulse, because unchecked motivation follows pleasure, not purpose. Discipline is the architecture that holds effort together when emotion collapses. Stoic philosophers understood this deeply, as Epictetus taught. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do, emphasizing that identity is built through consistent action, not bursts of excitement. Motivation often disguises itself as progress, giving people the illusion of movement through planning, dreaming, and consuming inspiration, while discipline demands execution in silence. Marcus Aurelius, despite ruling an empire, reminded himself daily, at dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work, as a human being, demonstrating that discipline is rooted in duty, not desire. Motivation seeks comfort and avoids resistance, but discipline walks directly into resistance, because it understands that resistance is the price of growth. Seneca warned that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And wasted time is almost always the product of waiting to feel motivated instead of acting out of discipline. Motivation fluctuates with energy, mood, weather, praise, and results, while discipline remains steady under boredom, criticism, and delay. History's great achievers were not perpetually motivated, they were relentlessly disciplined. Confucius emphasized self-regulation and ritual, teaching that moral and personal strength are built through consistent practice rather than emotional impulse. Discipline creates reliability, and reliability creates trust, both within oneself and from others. Motivation wants immediate reward. Discipline invests in delayed outcomes. Friedrich Nietzsche criticized modern humanity for seeking comfort and stimulation, rather than self-command, warning that he who cannot command himself should obey, meaning that without discipline, individuals become slaves to impulse, environment, and circumstance. Discipline is the invisible structure behind freedom. Without it, freedom dissolves into chaos. William James, a pioneer of psychology, stated, "The greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another, a choice that requires discipline, not motivation. Motivation reacts to success. Discipline creates it. Motivation depends on confidence. Discipline builds it. Motivation asks for clarity before action. Discipline gains clarity through action. Sun Tzu understood that battles are won before they are fought, through preparation and order. And preparation is nothing more than disciplined repetition long before motivation appears. The warrior does not wait to feel brave. He trains until bravery becomes irrelevant. Buddhist philosophy teaches right effort and right discipline, emphasizing that liberation comes not from emotional highs, but from consistent mindfulness and restraint. Discipline trains the nervous system to function under stress, while motivation collapses when stress appears. Carl Jung warned that undeveloped discipline allows the unconscious to dominate behavior, stating that what is not made conscious controls us. And discipline is the tool that brings behavior under conscious command. Motivation is loud and public. Discipline is quiet and private. Motivation thrives on applause. Discipline survives in isolation. Jordan Peterson argues that meaning is found in responsibility, not happiness, because happiness fluctuates but responsibility demands discipline. And it is through disciplined responsibility that self-respect is earned. Motivation seeks ease. Discipline accepts hardship as necessary. Stoicism teaches voluntary discomfort precisely to strengthen discipline, because a person who can act without comfort can act under any condition. Discipline transforms chaos into order through structure, routine, and commitment. Motivation resists routine because routine feels boring. But boredom is the training ground of mastery. Ralph Waldo Emerson noted that self-trust is the first secret of success, and self-trust is built only when discipline proves that you can rely on yourself, regardless of mood. Every time motivation fails and discipline continues, character deepens. Every time discipline replaces motivation, weakness is replaced with strength. Seneca wrote that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, and preparation is discipline sustained long after motivation disappears. Discipline outlasts fear because it does not negotiate with it. Motivation negotiates, discipline executes. Søren Kierkegaard warned that a life driven by mood leads to despair, because without commitment, the self fragments. Discipline unifies identity by aligning action with values. James Clear, echoing ancient wisdom in modern language, argues that you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems, and discipline is the engine of every effective system. Motivation is reactive. It responds to inspiration, while discipline is proactive. It creates momentum. Discipline does not require belief in success, only commitment to process. Nietzsche argued that strength comes from self-overcoming, not self-expression, and self-overcoming is impossible without discipline. The disciplined individual does not ask whether the task feels meaningful in the moment, because meaning is revealed over time through consistency. Discipline removes decision fatigue by eliminating debate. When action is scheduled, it is executed. Motivation creates excuses when energy drops. Discipline creates results when energy is low. Epictetus advised training desire itself, so that one desires what must be done. And this retraining is discipline in its purest form. Discipline creates freedom by reducing dependence on emotion. Freedom without discipline collapses into indulgence. Aristotle believed that virtue lies in choosing the good consistently, not occasionally, and consistency is discipline made visible. Motivation loves beginnings, discipline loves middles, and life is lived mostly in the middle. The warrior mindset is not emotional, it is procedural. Warriors train on days they feel strong and days they feel weak, because discipline does not wait for permission from mood. Marcus Aurelius reminded that loss of discipline leads to loss of self-command, and loss of self-command leads to vulnerability. Discipline teaches patience by forcing engagement without immediate reward. Discipline teaches humility by requiring effort even when no one is watching. Discipline teaches courage by demanding action despite fear. Viktor Frankl demonstrated that even when everything is taken away, discipline of attitude remains possible, and that inner discipline preserved dignity amid suffering. Motivation often dies in suffering, but discipline survives it. Modern culture glorifies motivation because it feels exciting, but excitement fades while discipline compounds. Discipline creates momentum that motivation later feeds on. Discipline is the bridge between intention and identity. Discipline is the daily proof that values are not theoretical. Without discipline, potential remains hypothetical. Ibn Khaldun observed that civilizations rise through discipline and decline through indulgence, a law equally true for individuals. Discipline transforms pain into progress by directing effort. Motivation escapes pain, discipline uses it. Discipline is not punishment, it is alignment. Alignment between thought, value, and action. The disciplined person does not need motivation, because action itself generates motivation through progress. Motivation is unreliable, discipline is dependable. Motivation burns hot and fast, discipline burns low and long. Nietzsche warned that comfort produces weakness, while discipline produces power. Discipline does not require inspiration, only obedience to principle. The inner warrior is not fueled by hype, but by habit. Discipline beats motivation, because motivation is conditional and discipline is unconditional. Motivation asks, how do I feel? Discipline asks, who am I becoming? Motivation wants to be pushed. Discipline pushes itself. Motivation reacts to results. Discipline creates them. And in the end, all philosophies converge on this unyielding truth. The life you want is built on the days you don't feel like showing up. Discipline is the force that carries you through boredom, doubt, fatigue, and fear. Discipline is the reason ordinary people achieve extraordinary outcomes. Discipline is the proof of self-respect. And that is why discipline beats motivation. Because motivation may start the journey, but only discipline finishes it. And only those who embrace discipline awaken the warrior within, steady, resilient, and unstoppable. 6. Train your body, strengthen your mind. Because the human being was never meant to be divided into separate compartments of flesh and thought, muscle and mind, action and intellect. From the earliest philosophies of East and West, the body has always been understood as the gateway through which discipline enters the mind, and the mind as the command center that gives meaning to physical effort. When the body is neglected, the mind grows restless, fragile, and undisciplined. But when the body is trained with intention, the mind is sharpened, steadied, and strengthened. Plato warned that neglecting the body weakens the soul, famously arguing that physical training is not merely for health, but for courage, clarity, and moral discipline, because a soft body produces a soft will. Aristotle believed that education must involve the cultivation of both body and mind, insisting that intellectual excellence cannot fully mature without physical strength and endurance, as the virtues of courage, patience, and moderation are learned through embodied struggle. Long before modern neuroscience, philosophers understood that the body teaches lessons the mind alone cannot grasp. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who endured slavery and physical hardship, taught that training the body through voluntary difficulty prepares the mind for unavoidable suffering, declaring that no man is free who is not master of himself, and self-mastery begins with bodily discipline. Physical training introduces resistance, and resistance is the language through which the nervous system learns control. When you push your body beyond comfort, the mind is forced to negotiate with pain, doubt, and fatigue, and in that negotiation, mental strength is forged. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled Rome while constantly surrounded by war and illness, reminded himself that the body is a tool of service, not indulgence, and that neglecting it weakens one's ability to endure responsibility, writing that a person must be prepared to do the work of a human being, regardless of discomfort. The Stoics practiced cold exposure, fasting, and physical exertion not to glorify pain, but to train resilience, because the disciplined body reduces fear of hardship and strengthens composure. Socrates himself trained physically and believed it. Shameful for a person to grow old without seeing what strength and vitality their body was capable of, arguing that physical weakness clouds judgment and diminishes self-respect. Modern science now confirms what ancient wisdom already knew, that exercise strengthens not only muscles, but attention, memory, emotional regulation, and stress tolerance. When the body moves with purpose, the mind follows with clarity. Friedrich Nietzsche, often misunderstood as purely intellectual, deeply valued physical strength, writing, "There is more wisdom in your body than in your deepest philosophy," emphasizing that instinct, vitality, and embodied power are essential to mental greatness. Nietzsche criticized cultures that prioritize comfort over strength, warning that weak bodies produce resentful minds, while strong bodies cultivate courage, creativity, and independence. Physical training humbles the ego by revealing limits, while simultaneously expanding those limits through repetition. Carl Jung observed that the psyche cannot be separated from the body, and that psychological imbalance often reflects a life lived without embodied challenge. Training the body grounds the mind in reality, pulling it out of abstraction, rumination, and anxiety. Eastern philosophies reinforce this unity. Buddhist monks use walking meditation, breath control, and disciplined posture to train attention through the body, recognizing that stillness of mind is achieved through physical awareness. Lao Tzu taught that strength and softness coexist, and that true power comes from balance, not excess, suggesting that physical training should cultivate adaptability as well as force. Martial traditions across cultures, from Greek Pancratian to Eastern martial arts, were designed not merely to build fighters, but to shape disciplined, focused, and ethical minds. Sun Tzu, though known as a strategist, understood the psychological importance of physical preparedness, noting that discipline in training eliminates fear in battle. The warrior who has trained their body does not panic under stress, because their nervous system has already learned how to function under pressure. Physical training teaches patience by demanding progress over time, humility by confronting failure, and perseverance by rewarding consistency rather than intensity. Seneca warned that luxury weakens both body and mind, arguing that voluntary hardship restores vigor, because the body should be treated more rigorously, that it may not be disobedient to the mind. Training the body aligns desire with discipline, teaching the mind that discomfort is not danger. William James, a founder of modern psychology, emphasized that action precedes emotion, not the other way around, meaning that disciplined physical action can rewire mental states such as confidence, motivation, and calm. When the body learns to act despite fatigue, the mind learns that feelings are not commands. Jordan Peterson often speaks about physical competence as the foundation of psychological stability, arguing that strength builds confidence not through ego, but through capability. A trained body sends a signal to the mind: I can endure. And endurance is the bedrock of mental toughness. Confucius emphasized self-cultivation through ritual and repetition, principles reflected in physical training routines that build character through consistency. Training the body creates order in daily life, and order is essential for mental clarity. Viktor Frankl, even in the extreme deprivation of concentration camps, observed that those who maintained physical routines and posture preserved greater psychological dignity, showing that bodily discipline can protect mental freedom even under oppression. Physical weakness often magnifies fear, while physical strength reduces it by expanding perceived capability. Ralph Waldo Emerson celebrated the harmony of body and mind, stating that strength of body contributes directly to strength of character because action shapes belief. Training the body confronts one with pain in controlled doses, teaching the mind how to interpret discomfort without panic. Pain becomes information rather than threat. This is why disciplined physical training reduces anxiety. It trains the brain to remain functional under stress. Stoic philosophy teaches that courage is not recklessness, but readiness, and readiness is built through physical preparation. The modern world encourages sedentary comfort, yet this comfort disconnects the mind from its evolutionary foundations, producing restlessness, depression, and fragility. Physical training restores that connection, anchoring the mind in effort, rhythm, and purpose. Nietzsche warned that societies that neglect physical strength drift toward nihilism, because vitality is the soil from which meaning grows. Training the body is not vanity, it is responsibility. It ensures that the mind has a capable vessel through which to act. Physical training also sharpens focus by demanding presence. Weights do not respond to distraction, and neither does endurance. Buddhist mindfulness practices emphasize breath awareness, precisely because breath bridges body and mind. Ibn Khaldun, observing civilizations, noted that physical hardship builds strength and cohesion, while excessive comfort leads to decline, a principle equally true for individuals. When you train your body, you reduce reliance on willpower by building habit, and habit stabilizes the mind. Aristotle believed virtue arises through practiced action, not theory, and physical training embodies this principle more clearly than any abstraction. Strength training, endurance training, and disciplined movement all reinforce the same lesson. Progress is earned, not granted. The body becomes a daily reminder of effort, discipline, and cause and effect. James Allen wrote that character is shaped by thought, but thought is shaped by action, and disciplined action is often physical. The warrior mindset is not purely psychological, it is embodied. Posture affects confidence, breath affects emotion, movement affects clarity. Training the body teaches self-respect, because caring for one's strength signals belief in one's own worth. Nietzsche celebrated self-overcoming, and self-overcoming begins with pushing the body beyond yesterday's limits. The mind learns resilience by watching the body survive difficulty. Physical training does not eliminate suffering, but it prepares the individual to face it without collapse. Stoics believe that a prepared body frees the mind from unnecessary fear. When the body is strong, the mind is less reactive. When the body is disciplined, the mind is less scattered. Training the body is therefore not optional. It is foundational. Modern neuroscience shows that exercise increases neuroplasticity, reinforcing the ancient insight that movement reshapes thought. The warrior does not separate training of flesh from training of spirit, because they are two expressions of the same discipline. Every repetition strengthens muscle and reinforces patience. Every mile trains lungs and trains resolve. Every moment of fatigue teaches the mind to stay present. Train your body. Strengthen your mind is not a slogan. It is a law of human development, recognized across philosophy, psychology, and history. Neglect the body and the mind weakens through excess thought, fear, and instability. Train the body and the mind grows calm, confident, and resilient. And this is the ultimate truth echoed by thinkers across time. The path to mental strength runs through physical discipline, because the body is the first teacher, the first battlefield, and the first proof that the warrior within is awake, capable, and ready to endure. Adapt and overcome. 7. Take full responsibility for your life, because the moment you do, you reclaim your power, and until that moment, no motivation, no discipline, no strength, mental or physical, can truly change the trajectory of your existence. Throughout history, the greatest thinkers have agreed on one uncomfortable truth: blaming circumstances, fate, society, parents, enemies, or luck may provide emotional relief, but it guarantees stagnation, while responsibility, though heavy and painful, is the doorway to freedom. Epictetus, born a slave and physically crippled, understood this better than most, declaring, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And mastery begins the instant you stop outsourcing responsibility for your life to forces outside your control. Responsibility is not about guilt, nor is it about self-hatred. It is about authorship, about recognizing that you are the primary cause of your actions, your reactions, and ultimately your character. Marcus Aurelius, ruling the Roman Empire under constant pressure, reminded himself, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it," emphasizing that responsibility begins in perception, in how we interpret events rather than what events occur. People often fear responsibility because it removes excuses. But excuses are the chains that keep individuals psychologically imprisoned. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existential philosopher, wrote, "Man is condemned to be free," meaning that even refusing responsibility is itself a choice, and a choice one must answer for. To take responsibility is to accept that even when life is unfair, your response to unfairness is still yours. Friedrich Nietzsche framed this idea through the concept of self-overcoming, arguing that strength arises when individuals stop resenting reality and start shaping themselves in response to it, famously stating, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Responsibility gives birth to that why by forcing you to define what you stand for. Without responsibility, suffering feels meaningless. But with responsibility, suffering becomes material for growth. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps, demonstrated the ultimate expression of responsibility when he wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances," proving that responsibility survives even when freedom does not. Modern culture often promotes victimhood as identity, but philosophers across time have warned that identifying as a victim erodes agency and weakens character. Stoicism teaches that peace is not found in controlling events, but in controlling one's judgments and actions, because responsibility always lies within the sphere of choice. Socrates devoted his life to self-examination, believing that an unexamined life is not worth living, precisely because a life without responsibility for one's beliefs and actions is lived unconsciously. Taking responsibility demands honesty, the kind that strips away comforting lies about who is to blame for your failures. Aristotle believed that virtue requires voluntary action, arguing that moral responsibility exists only when individuals knowingly choose their behavior rather than acting from impulse or excuse. Responsibility therefore transforms a person from a passive object shaped by circumstance into an active subject shaping destiny. Confucius emphasized self-cultivation as the root of order in family, society, and state, insisting that social harmony begins with personal responsibility rather than external enforcement. Those who refuse responsibility demand control over others, while those who accept responsibility seek control over themselves. Responsibility is heavy because it forces you to confront your own shortcomings, laziness, fear, and avoidance. Yet that very weight builds strength. Jordan Peterson often argues that meaning is found in responsibility, not happiness, because happiness is fleeting, while responsibility anchors identity and provides direction. To take responsibility is to accept that your habits are yours to change. Your reactions are yours to govern, and your future is shaped by your present choices. Seneca warned that blaming fortune is a form of moral weakness, stating that a man who is brave and wise should not complain of his lot in life, because complaint wastes energy that could be invested in improvement. Responsibility does not deny injustice. It refuses to surrender agency to it. Carl Jung warned that what we do not take responsibility for in ourselves appears as fate, meaning that unconscious avoidance manifests as repeated suffering. Responsibility brings the unconscious into awareness, breaking destructive patterns. Modern psychology confirms that individuals who perceive control over their actions experience greater resilience, confidence, and mental health, while those who externalize blame experience helplessness. William James noted that human beings can change their lives by changing their attitudes, a process that begins with responsibility for thought. Responsibility also demands ownership of success, not just failure, because without ownership, confidence remains fragile and dependent on validation. Ralph Waldo Emerson captured this when he wrote, "The only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to be," emphasizing that destiny is shaped through personal responsibility, not prediction. Taking responsibility means abandoning the fantasy that someone else will save you, fix you, or rescue you from your own inaction. This realization is painful, but it is also liberating. Nietzsche despised the morality of blame, arguing that resentment poisons strength, while responsibility fuels self-creation. Responsibility forces clarity. If your life is not what you want it to be, you must first look inward before pointing outward. Buddhist philosophy teaches that suffering arises from attachment and ignorance, not from external conditions alone, and that liberation begins with responsibility for one's mental habits. Responsibility is the bridge between awareness and action. Sun Tzu understood that victory belongs to those who prepare, adapt, and take responsibility for outcomes rather than blaming chance. The warrior who blames the terrain loses the battle, while the warrior who studies it gains advantage. Responsibility builds competence, because once you accept that outcomes depend on you, you are forced to develop skill rather than excuse. Ibn Khaldun observed that civilizations decay when individuals abandon responsibility for discipline and sacrifice, replacing them with indulgence and blame, a pattern mirrored in personal decline. Responsibility also means accepting responsibility for who you become under pressure. Not just when conditions are ideal. Adversity reveals character, but responsibility shapes it. Søren Kierkegaard warned that avoiding responsibility leads to despair because the self never fully emerges when choices are deferred or denied. Responsibility demands commitment, and commitment gives identity structure. To take responsibility is to say, "This is my life, and I will answer for it." Responsibility is not about controlling everything. It is about controlling what is controllable and accepting what is not without surrendering dignity. Stoic philosophy defines this boundary clearly, freeing individuals from anxiety about what lies beyond their influence. Responsibility transforms fear into focus, because once responsibility is accepted, fear loses its power to paralyze. Responsibility eliminates waiting for motivation, permission, perfect conditions, or external validation. James Allen wrote, "Circumstances do not make the man, they reveal him." Reinforcing that responsibility lies in response, not situation. Responsibility also restores self-respect, because self-respect is earned by keeping promises to oneself. Each responsible action reinforces identity as someone who can be trusted. Responsibility demands sacrifice, because growth always costs comfort. Nietzsche argued that greatness requires the willingness to carry weight rather than avoid it. Responsibility trains resilience by forcing engagement with difficulty instead of escape. Viktor Frankl demonstrated that responsibility preserves meaning even in suffering, because meaning is born when one accepts responsibility for one's attitude and actions. Responsibility clarifies priorities by exposing what truly matters. When excuses are removed, purpose emerges. Modern society often confuses responsibility with oppression. Yet philosophers across history have insisted the opposite, that responsibility is the highest form of freedom. Freedom without responsibility dissolves into chaos, while responsibility without freedom becomes tyranny. The warrior path balances both. To take responsibility is to stand upright in the world, to stop hiding behind narratives of victimhood, and to accept that your life, with all its flaws and potential, is ultimately yours to shape. Responsibility does not guarantee success, but it guarantees dignity. It does not promise comfort, but it promises agency. And this is the final truth echoed across centuries of philosophy, psychology, and lived experience. Taking full responsibility for your life is the moment you awaken the warrior within, because only then do you stop reacting and start choosing, stop blaming and start building, stop waiting and start becoming, and from that moment forward, your life is no longer something that merely happens to you. It is something you deliberately create. 8. Eliminate weak habits and toxic influences, because no warrior is defeated first on the battlefield. He is defeated quietly, daily, through small compromises, unconscious routines, and the silent permission he gives to weakness to live inside him. History and philosophy agree on one harsh reality. Greatness is not destroyed by one catastrophic failure, but by tolerated decay. Aristotle warned that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. And by extension, weakness is also a habit, one practiced daily until it becomes identity. Weak habits do not announce themselves as dangerous. They disguise themselves as comfort, entertainment, coping, or harmless relief. Yet over time, they erode discipline. dull ambition, and drain the will to fight. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this clearly when he declared, "The greatest events, they are not our loudest but our stillest hours," meaning that the quiet choices made in solitude shape destiny more than dramatic moments. Toxic influences work the same way, slow, subtle, corrosive, rarely obvious, but relentlessly destructive. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, cautioned, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Because without clarity of identity, a person becomes vulnerable to habits and influences that contradict their higher nature. Weak habits thrive in environments where standards are low and accountability is absent. Seneca warned against such environments when he wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you, recognizing that character is contagious, and prolonged exposure to mediocrity normalizes it." Toxic influences are not only people, they are ideas, media, routines, addictions, and narratives that teach you to settle, complain, escape, or numb instead of confront. Plato, in the Republic, argued that the soul is shaped by what it repeatedly consumes, whether through stories, music, or companionship, long before modern psychology confirmed the same. A warrior who feeds his mind with triviality, negativity, and distraction should not be surprised when his courage weakens. Weak habits often arise from avoidance. The avoidance of pain, effort, responsibility, and self-examination. And Carl Jung famously warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Habits left unexamined become invisible chains. Eliminating weak habits begins with ruthless self-awareness, the kind Socrates demanded when he insisted that the unexamined life is not worth living, because a life governed by unconscious patterns is not truly lived, it is endured. Toxic influences often masquerade as friends, entertainment, or cultural norms. But Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary?" Because necessity is the filter through which discipline survives. Modern society glorifies indulgence and calls it self-care. But philosophers across centuries have warned that unchecked, indulgence weakens the soul. Buddha taught that craving is the root of suffering, and habits driven by craving inevitably lead to dissatisfaction, dependency, and loss of inner freedom. Weakness is rarely physical at first. It is mental and moral, and once it settles there, the body follows. William James noted that habits form the enormous flywheel of society, meaning they carry momentum. For better or worse, and once set in motion, they require conscious effort to stop. Eliminating weak habits is not about punishment. It is about alignment, about removing what contradicts your highest aims. Nietzsche's concept of self-overcoming demands that one repeatedly confront and discard versions of the self that no longer serve growth. Toxic influences resist this process because they benefit from your stagnation. People who fear your growth will unconsciously sabotage it, not always out of malice, but out of insecurity. Arthur Schopenhauer observed that most people prefer comfort over truth, which is why weak habits spread more easily than strong ones. The warrior path is lonely at times, precisely because it rejects what is popular in favor of what is necessary. Stoicism teaches that external things are indifferent, yet the company you keep and the habits you cultivate shape your inner discipline, which is not indifferent at all. Cleanthes, a Stoic, emphasized training the will like a muscle. Unused, it atrophies. Toxic environments weaken the will by encouraging excuses and shared irresponsibility. Weak habits also distort time perception, making short-term pleasure feel more valuable than long-term meaning. Viktor Frankl argued that meaning, not pleasure, is the true motivator of human endurance, and habits that prioritize pleasure over purpose eventually hollow life out. Eliminating weak habits requires replacing them because nature abhors a vacuum. Aristotle believed virtue must be practiced, not merely desired, meaning discipline grows only when exercised. Toxic influences discourage practice by mocking effort and celebrating apathy. Confucius emphasized self-discipline as the foundation of social harmony, arguing that chaos in society begins with disorder in the individual. Weak habits, when multiplied across individuals, become cultural decay. Ibn Khaldun observed that civilizations fall when discipline gives way to luxury and indulgence, a pattern mirrored in individual collapse. Eliminating toxic influences is therefore not just personal, it is civilizational. Nietzsche despised herd mentality because it rewards conformity over excellence, warning that madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, nations, and ages, it is the rule. Toxic groups normalize weakness by reframing it as authenticity or freedom. True freedom, however, requires discipline. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that humans are responsible for what they become, even under pressure, and that blaming influence is itself a choice. Eliminating weak habits is an act of responsibility, a declaration that you will no longer outsource your character to environment or impulse. Sun Tzu understood that victory is secured before battle through preparation, discipline, and elimination of vulnerabilities. And weak habits are vulnerabilities that enemies, internal or external, exploit. The warrior who refuses to audit his habits fights with a cracked shield. Modern neuroscience confirms what philosophers intuited. Repeated behaviors rewire the brain, strengthening pathways that make future behavior more likely. Weakness practiced becomes weakness preferred. James Allen wrote, "A man is literally what he thinks, and habits are thoughts made visible through action." Toxic influences feed destructive thoughts and normalize resignation. Eliminating them feels uncomfortable because it disrupts identity. But growth always requires identity death. Kierkegaard warned that avoiding this discomfort leads to despair, because the self never fully emerges without decisive commitment. Weak habits thrive in ambiguity, while discipline thrives in clarity. Marcus Aurelius advised, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one, because endless contemplation without action is itself a weak habit." Elimination requires decisiveness, not perfection. Stoic practice emphasizes daily self-review, asking where one failed, indulged or avoided effort. Because correction requires acknowledgement. Toxic influences resist accountability, mocking seriousness and discipline as rigidity. Nietzsche would call this decadence, the refusal to bear weight. Strength, by contrast, is the capacity to carry responsibility without resentment. Eliminating weak habits restores self-respect, because self-respect is built on evidence, not affirmation. Every habit removed is a vote cast for a stronger identity. Viktor Frankl demonstrated that even in the worst conditions, humans retain the freedom to choose discipline over despair, meaning no one is exempt from responsibility for habit. Weak habits also distort values, making survival feel like success and comfort feel like achievement. Aristotle rejected this, insisting that flourishing, eudaimonia, requires excellence of character, not mere existence. Toxic influences reduce ambition by ridiculing aspiration. Yet Emerson reminded that self-trust is the first secret of success, and self-trust cannot coexist with self-betrayal. Eliminating weak habits is an act of loyalty to your future self. Stoic philosophy teaches premeditatio, malorum, anticipating challenges, to avoid being surprised into weakness. Weak habits flourish when life is treated casually. Discipline treats life as significant. Buddhist monks eliminate distraction, not because pleasure is evil, but because clarity is rare and fragile. Clarity is the warrior's greatest asset. Nietzsche insisted that one must be willing to stand alone to create oneself. And eliminating toxic influences often means temporary isolation from those who cannot follow. This solitude is not punishment, it is incubation. Plato's allegory of the cave illustrates how those who leave familiar illusions are often mocked by those who remain chained, yet truth demands departure. Weak habits keep individuals chained to immediate gratification. Eliminating them is an act of rebellion against inner tyranny. Jordan Peterson often emphasizes that cleaning up your life begins with small, disciplined actions, not grand ideology, echoing ancient wisdom that character is built incrementally. Weak habits steal momentum, while strong habits compound it. Seneca warned that life is long enough if not wasted. Yet weak habits specialize in waste, of time, energy, and potential. Eliminating toxic influences creates silence, and in silence, purpose speaks. Nietzsche believed silence was necessary for self-creation because noise prevents reflection. Ultimately, eliminating weak habits and toxic influences is not about becoming harsh. It is about becoming precise, intentional, and aligned. It is about choosing struggle over stagnation, effort over escape, and responsibility over excuse. And this is the timeless truth echoed by philosophers, warriors, and survivors across history. The warrior within you cannot awaken in an environment that feeds weakness, because strength is not compatible with constant compromise. The moment you eliminate what poisons your discipline, your clarity returns, your will sharpens, your standards rise, and you no longer drift through life reacting. You advance deliberately, forged by choice, guided by purpose, and strengthened by the daily refusal to let weakness live rent-free in your soul. 9. Live with purpose, not pleasure, because pleasure is fleeting, deceptive, and ultimately empty, while purpose is demanding, painful at times, yet profoundly fulfilling. And every civilization, every philosophy, and every great individual has discovered this truth the hard way. Modern life trains people to chase comfort, entertainment, and instant gratification. But ancient wisdom consistently warns that a life centered on pleasure leads not to happiness, but to weakness, dependency, and inner decay. Aristotle distinguished between lives of pleasure and lives of virtue, arguing that true human flourishing, eudaimonia, comes not from indulgence, but from excellence of character, discipline, and meaningful action. Pleasure appeals to the senses, but purpose appeals to the soul, and the soul cannot be satisfied by stimulation alone. Epictetus, often misunderstood as a hedonist, actually warned that uncontrolled desire leads to anxiety and pain, teaching that the highest pleasure is freedom from craving, not its endless satisfaction. Stoic philosophers went further, rejecting pleasure as a goal entirely, with Marcus Aurelius reminding himself, "Do not pursue pleasure for its own sake," because pleasure, when pursued directly, enslaves rather than liberates. Purpose, by contrast, requires responsibility, sacrifice, and endurance, qualities that forge strength. Friedrich Nietzsche despised comfort-driven living, calling it decadence, and insisted that greatness is born from struggle, famously declaring, "What makes one heroic is not the pursuit of happiness, but the pursuit of a goal." Pleasure demands little of you, while purpose demands everything: your time, energy, ego, and excuses. Viktor Frankl, who endured unimaginable suffering in concentration camps, shattered the illusion that happiness is the ultimate aim of life when he wrote, "Man's search for meaning is the primary motivation in his life," demonstrating that humans can endure almost any pain when life has meaning, but cannot endure emptiness even in comfort. Pleasure numbs pain temporarily, but purpose transforms pain into significance. Buddhist philosophy teaches that attachment to pleasure is the root of suffering, because pleasure is impermanent, and clinging to what fades guarantees dissatisfaction. Monks renounce excess not to punish themselves, but to free the mind for clarity and compassion. Schopenhauer viewed pleasure as merely the brief absence of pain, not a positive state, warning that a life organized around pleasure oscillates endlessly between desire and boredom. Purpose, however, gives structure to suffering, direction to effort, and coherence to identity. Søren Kierkegaard warned that a pleasure-driven life leads to despair, because the self never fully commits to anything beyond momentary satisfaction. Without commitment, identity fragments. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that humans define themselves through choices, and a life devoted to pleasure avoids the weight of choice, resulting in bad faith and existential emptiness. Purpose forces you to choose who you are willing to become and who you are willing to disappoint. Confucius emphasized duty, self-cultivation, and moral responsibility over pleasure, believing that harmony in society begins with individuals living according to principle rather than appetite. Civilizations collapse when comfort replaces character. Ibn Khaldun observed that societies decay when discipline gives way to luxury, a pattern mirrored in individual lives consumed by pleasure-seeking. Pleasure weakens the will by training it to expect reward without effort. William James noted that habits shape destiny, and habits built around pleasure erode the capacity for sustained effort, while habits built around purpose strengthen resilience. Nietzsche's concept of self-overcoming demands that individuals repeatedly sacrifice comfort to create higher versions of themselves. Pleasure resists this process because it rewards stagnation. Purpose demands growth. Stoicism teaches that external pleasures are indifferent, while virtue is the only true good because pleasure depends on circumstance, but virtue depends on choice. Epictetus, born a slave, understood this deeply, stating, "Freedom is secured not by the fulfillment of men's desires, but by the removal of desire," meaning that mastery over craving is the foundation of inner freedom. Pleasure-centered lives are reactive, driven by impulse and environment, while purpose-centered lives are proactive, guided by values. Plato, in the Republic, argued that the soul has rational, spirited, and appetitive parts, and when appetite rules, chaos follows. But when reason and purpose govern, harmony emerges. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient insight, showing that constant stimulation dulls motivation and weakens attention, while meaningful challenge strengthens focus and self-control. Jordan Peterson often emphasizes that meaning is found in responsibility, not happiness, because happiness fluctuates, but responsibility grounds life in something larger than mood. Pleasure is individualistic, but purpose often connects the self to service, contribution, and legacy. Ralph Waldo Emerson captured this when he wrote, "Life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced, meaning deeply, consciously, and courageously, not passively consumed." Pleasure encourages consumption, while purpose encourages creation. Nietzsche warned that societies obsessed with comfort breed what he called the last man, a figure who seeks ease above all else and avoids risk, greatness, and sacrifice. The warrior within cannot awaken in such a life, because warriors are forged by hardship, not indulgence. Viktor Frankl observed that people who chase happiness directly become more anxious and depressed, while those who commit to meaningful goals experience fulfillment as a byproduct. Pleasure promises joy now but steals strength later. Purpose delays gratification, but compounds meaning over time. Buddha taught the middle way, rejecting both indulgence and extreme asceticism, emphasizing disciplined awareness over pleasure-seeking. Awareness reveals that pleasure fades quickly, leaving craving in its wake. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that fame, luxury, and pleasure dissolve into dust, urging focus on duty and virtue instead. Seneca warned that luxury weakens the mind, writing, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." Purpose eliminates this poverty by defining enough. Pleasure expands desire endlessly, while purpose limits desire intentionally. Kierkegaard believed that choosing purpose requires courage, because it demands long-term commitment in a world addicted to immediacy. Existential philosophy teaches that meaning is not discovered, but created through action, sacrifice, and responsibility. Pleasure avoids responsibility, while purpose embraces it. Stoic practice emphasizes voluntary discomfort to reduce dependence on pleasure and build resilience. Not because pleasure is evil, but because dependence is. Modern culture mistakes pleasure for happiness, but happiness without meaning collapses under adversity. Nietzsche insisted that suffering is not the enemy, but meaninglessness is. Purpose turns suffering into fuel. Pleasure attempts to anesthetize it. Frankl proved that even in extreme suffering, humans retain the freedom to choose meaning over despair. Pleasure is fragile, breaking under pressure, while purpose grows stronger. Aristotle believed that the highest human good is activity of the soul, in accordance with virtue, not passive enjoyment. Activity implies effort, discipline, and direction. Purpose gives life narrative coherence, while pleasure fragments it into disconnected moments. Plato's cave illustrates how people mistake shadows, comfort, entertainment, distraction for reality, resisting the painful ascent toward truth and purpose. Those who leave the cave are not happier at first, but they are free. Emerson believed that self-reliance requires rejecting societal pressure to conform to pleasure-driven norms. Purpose often demands standing alone. Nietzsche accepted loneliness as the price of greatness, because the path of purpose is rarely crowded. Pleasure is popular, purpose is personal. Sun Tzu understood that victory requires discipline, patience, and long-term thinking, not impulsive pleasure. The warrior who seeks comfort loses before the battle begins. Purpose trains patience by tying effort to meaning. Pleasure erodes patience by rewarding impulse. James Allen wrote, "Strong men are forged out of trials, not indulgence." Purpose reframes trials as necessary training. Pleasure frames them as obstacles to escape. Modern psychology confirms that people with purpose live longer, recover faster from trauma, and experience greater life satisfaction than those who prioritize pleasure alone. Pleasure satisfies appetite, but purpose satisfies identity. Identity requires commitment. Commitment requires sacrifice. Sacrifice requires courage, and courage is the heartbeat of the warrior. To live with purpose is to accept discomfort voluntarily in service of something meaningful. To live for pleasure is to avoid discomfort at the cost of significance. Philosophers across centuries agree on this final truth. A life devoted to pleasure shrinks the soul, while a life devoted to purpose expands it. The warrior within you awakens only when you choose meaning over comfort, direction over distraction, responsibility over indulgence, and long-term fulfillment over short-term pleasure. Because in the end, pleasure asks, what feels good now? But purpose asks, what is worth suffering for? And it is only by answering that second question that a human being rises from consumer to creator, from spectator to warrior, and from existence to significance. 10. Decide to rise today, because every moment you hesitate, every morning you choose inertia over action. You grant your circumstances permission to define you, and history, philosophy, and human experience all testify that greatness belongs to those who, despite fear, fatigue, or failure, make the conscious decision to rise, to act, and to reclaim their destiny. Epictetus, the Stoic who endured slavery and hardship, taught that freedom is found not in circumstances, but in the decisions we make. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters, reminding us that the simple act of deciding to rise transforms the powerless into warriors. Rising today is not a metaphorical phrase. It is an existential declaration of agency, a rebellion against passivity, and the first step in reclaiming the self from the tyranny of excuses, fear, and self-doubt. Marcus Aurelius, facing the burdens of empire and the inevitability of mortality, reminded himself daily, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, I will meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, illustrating that rising is not just about leaving the bed, it is about facing life's adversities with courage and presence. To rise today is to recognize that life offers no guarantees, and that waiting for perfect conditions is the enemy of action. Søren Kierkegaard warned against postponement, writing that life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards, highlighting that reflection without forward motion is meaningless, and that the decision to rise transforms insight into experience. Weak minds defer action to tomorrow, comfort, or circumstance. But strong minds understand that the very act of choosing to rise generates momentum, courage, and clarity. Friedrich Nietzsche taught that the essence of human greatness lies in overcoming, in repeatedly standing after each fall, declaring, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." And the decision to rise today is the first affirmation of that why, a conscious refusal to surrender to inertia. Every great individual, from Plato to Confucius, recognized that action precedes mastery, that deliberation without execution is vanity, and that the disciplined choice to rise, even in small ways, trains character, courage, and resilience. Aristotle argued that excellence is a habit, not an event, meaning that deciding to rise today is a microcosm of a lifetime, built on repeated acts of intentionality. Rising today may require pain, discomfort, confrontation, or sacrifice, but Viktor Frankl demonstrated through unimaginable suffering that human beings can endure almost anything when they exercise agency, when they choose meaning over despair, proving that the act of deciding to rise is simultaneously an act of defiance and creation. To rise today is to reject the seductive whispers of lethargy, distraction, and resignation, recognizing that life rewards neither complaint nor delay. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it," reminding us that procrastination is not just a habit, it is the thief of destiny. The warrior decides without equivocation that no external circumstance will dictate action, that no internal fear will paralyze progress. Epictetus emphasized the cultivation of inner discipline, teaching that obstacles do not prevent rising. They define the opportunity to rise. In this way, every adversity becomes a proving ground, and every morning offers a battlefield of choice. The decision to rise today is simultaneously an act of self-determination, a moral commitment, and a psychological strategy, because our brains respond to action more powerfully than to abstract intention. William James asserted that the deepest principle of human behavior is that belief becomes truth through action, meaning that the choice to rise manifests courage, discipline, and resilience before they become habitual. Rising today is not contingent on mood, energy, or external validation. It is a sovereign act, one that sets the tone for the hours, days, and years that follow. Nietzsche exhorted humanity to embrace life as a constant creation, to shape the self as an artist shapes art, and deciding to rise is the canvas of agency on which the warrior paints identity. Pleasure, avoidance, and comfort are adversaries of rising, because they reward stagnation and weaken resolve. Buddhist philosophy teaches that mindfulness and awareness are cultivated through deliberate action, and the simple yet radical act of rising each day trains presence, intention, and alignment with purpose. To rise today is to assume responsibility for the entirety of your life, acknowledging that waiting for external salvation is futile. Jean-Paul Sartre warned that humans are condemned to be free, and that freedom is inseparable from responsibility, meaning that to rise is to exercise freedom rather than defer it. Every morning, the decision to rise is a rehearsal of courage, a conscious rejection of fear, and a refusal to yield to passivity. Confucius emphasized the moral imperative of action aligned with virtue, teaching that the cultivation of character requires decisive engagement, not passive contemplation. Weak habits whisper for delay. Toxic influences encourage surrender. But the warrior who decides to rise today demonstrates the internal sovereignty that philosophers across millennia exalted. Marcus Aurelius teaches that obstacles are the raw material of virtue. When you rise in the face of them, you forge patience, courage, and fortitude, and the very act of rising becomes an ethical statement. Seneca reminded that life is a succession of days, each offering the opportunity to excel or fail, and choosing to rise is the affirmation that one will not squander time, that one will act with deliberate agency, that one will honor existence itself. Deciding to rise today is also a strategic maneuver. By acting immediately, you harness the momentum of will before hesitation. Doubt or distraction can sap it. Aristotle understood that action produces character, and by repeatedly rising, the individual cultivates a disposition toward courage, resilience, and purpose. The warrior's rise is never a single act. It is a habit, a practice, a declaration repeated in mind, body, and spirit, each repetition reinforcing identity, clarity, and power. Viktor Frankl demonstrated that even in the most extreme deprivation, humans retain the capacity to decide, and that every decision to rise, every choice to respond rather than surrender, is a seed of freedom and meaning. To rise today is to embrace discomfort, challenge, and responsibility willingly, understanding that struggle is the forge of character and comfort is the prison of the soul. Nietzsche affirmed that human beings are defined by the questions they are willing to confront and the actions they are willing to take, and choosing to rise is the first answer to the ultimate question of life. Will I stand despite fear? Will I act despite pain? Will I create despite uncertainty? Rising today also generates influence beyond the self. By embodying agency, resilience, and intentionality, the warrior inspires others, becoming a beacon of possibility in a world addicted to excuses. Seneca wrote that, "Associate with those who will improve you." But the first association is with oneself. Rising establishes authority over your own life, over your habits, over your reactions. The decision to rise is therefore simultaneously an internal victory and a social precedent. Epictetus emphasized that external events are neither good nor evil. The moral worth lies in the response, and choosing to rise transforms adversity into opportunity. Every morning carries with it the same battlefield of choice that faced heroes, philosophers, and warriors of history. Act or be acted upon, create or be consumed, rise or remain fallen. William James teaches that action shapes belief and belief shapes identity. By rising today, you align thought, intention, and motion, creating coherence, purpose, and momentum. Rising today is a defiance of entropy, of doubt, of fear. It is a moral, psychological, and existential commitment to life itself. Søren Kierkegaard observed that life is filled with anxiety and uncertainty, and that courage is manifested not in absence of fear, but in choosing despite it. Rising today is courage in practice, not theory. It is the act that converts potential into reality, thought into habit, and intention into consequence. Nietzsche exhorted humanity to embrace struggle as the pathway to greatness, teaching that repeated acts of rising create strength, self-mastery, and resilience. Confucius, Plato, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Frankl, and countless others underscore the same truth. The warrior is not defined by circumstance, but by decision. Rising today, repeatedly and intentionally, affirms sovereignty over the self, mastery over action, and the commitment to live deliberately rather than drift passively. The decision to rise is simple in statement, but monumental in effect. It is the fulcrum on which destiny turns, the first act of courage in a lifetime of challenges, the spark that awakens the dormant warrior within, reminding the mind, body, and soul that no matter the past, no matter the fear, no matter the resistance, today I rise, I act, I choose, and I reclaim my life. So I ask you again, will you stay asleep, or will you wake up the warrior within you? Stand up in your life. Stand up in your mind. Stand up in your purpose. Fight for your future. Fight for your family. Fight for the person you know you can become. Because deep inside you, stronger than fear, louder than doubt, greater than any obstacle, the warrior is awake.